exploring this issue around corporate collaboration. And we're really trying to kind of dig deeper into it and kind of take it from multiple different perspectives. But to get started, let's just go ahead and have each panel member introduce themselves.
Thank you, Denise. I'm John Lewis, and I'm the co-founder of the CoHero Institute for Collaborative Change Leadership, where we do coaching and leadership development around change leadership. Also adjunct faculty in organizational learning, and I'm the author of the book called The Explanation Age, which is what should come after the information age, and please stop by the bookstore at 3:15. I'll be there for book signing.
Thank you.
Well, about 30 years ago, I designed something called the information flow analysis, which I employed at many organizations. And they kept telling me, but isn't this knowledge management? And evidently it was. Since then, I've done several other things. One is to write a book called Writing the Current, which again, I'll also be there signing this afternoon. I was also a division chief, a former division chief at the World Bank. There I was in charge of the division that handled customer support, but against all of the end users in the institutional. But one of the things that I'm the most proud of is that I created and managed a technical library, which turned out to be, there were only 2 on the East Coast at that time. The other one was at Bell Labs. So I thought that was pretty nice. I also teach. I teach collaboration, I teach knowledge management and general management, both at Columbia University and at Walden University, where I coach PhD students. Let's see. My focus today, however, is more on helping organizations and work units and individuals really actuate resilience, creativity, and innovation in their lives. I'm a speaker and a coach. You need that closer? Is that better? Thank you. Thank you for telling me. All right. I guess the only thing I will add is that I blog on Psychology Today on a topic called resilient leadership. And very shortly there will be coming out a podcast of my radio shows on, again, resilient leadership.
Thanks, Madelyn. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Phil Barnett. I'm the Knowledge Management Director currently for the financial officers and consulting practices in Hiedrick and Struggles. Hiedrick and Struggles is a premier executive search, leadership development, and culture change firm. I actually tell everyone I got my MBA at PwC because I was at PwC for about 20 years. And I also tell everyone I got my PhD at Dow Chemical because I was at Dow for a number of years before moving to PwC. At Dow, we were able, from a knowledge management standpoint, to organize 40,000 patents into a knowledge base that the company actually monetized. And Dow became very influential in terms of its approach to knowledge management. At PwC, Denise and I worked very closely in the knowledge services organization where I was the operations leader. And you can think about what I do more as reduction to practice from the strategists and visionaries and really taking vision to practical implementation and also to measurement. So I've done a number of ROI studies applied to knowledge management, and of course the challenge is always to convince your investors that what you're doing is worthwhile and what you're envisioning is even more valuable. Thanks for having us.
Great. So let's jump right in. Optimizing collaborative intelligence is being defined by us and PwC as harnessing the power of people working in organizational networks to achieve targeted outcomes. We did go ahead and take some time and write some one pager for you all to give you all a chance. If you haven't all got a copy of it, let me know afterwards and we'll get you a copy. It's also, of course, available online. We uploaded it. But let's go ahead and get started on the first question. So the first question to the panel, and we'll start with John immediately to my left, is why do you think business leaders are increasingly trying to improve collaboration across their enterprises?
Thanks, Denise. Basically, let's start with just an assumption that we know that teams can accomplish more than individuals, or more than a silo of individuals. So that's not the question. The question is around what is the definition of teams and what is the collaboration that really needs to happen within a team. When we look at the framework of input, process, output, as we look at an organization or a team that's producing something, we've actually made significant progress in the last few years on the ends, on the input and output of that process, and connecting what the organization does to its suppliers and to its customers. There's a reason why all of a sudden now in our language we've heard of crowdsourcing and we've heard of crowd reviewing. Where we're at now is really coming back to look at that middle ground, the process of the people in the organization that are doing something, that are having that input and that output. And the difficulty there really is what we're finding is really because it's because we're pushing up against the definition of what an institution really is and how it has traditionally been set up to operate. And one of the main drivers of that has been this business strategy called division of labor. And sometimes now people might say division of labor gone wild, where it's been a wildly successful lever that we could push all the way forward without side effect in the industrial age. But in the knowledge age, we're finding a lot of side effects to this concept. And so in trying to affect those side effects, we've had sort of some false starts and some isolated attempts at it, whether it's saying, hey, go show up to this knowledge sharing session, or maybe installing some type of collaboration platform. But we've not really stopped and looked holistically at collaborative intelligence until now, and that's part of the exciting thing about our topic.
Thank you, John. You want me next?
Yes, please, now.
All right.
Same question.
Same question. Anybody here have a graduate degree? Good. Then you know that the difference between undergraduate and graduate is that in graduate school you're supposed to think. Yeah. And I tell my students that, first off, I'm going to mark you on how you think, guys, not on how long your paper is, not on the grammar, not on any of those other things, but how you think. Well, I sometimes think that message gets lost when we get into the organizational setting. We need to be thinking there as well. And I loved your comment, John, that we know that we have to work with teams in order to solve today's problems, and we do. The question is, can we help those people really think together? I think it was Joe Malone of MIT did a study some years ago to look at what happens in a group that actually is doing better thinking. And one of the characteristics is that they know how to converse with one another. They know how to give each person time to speak and listen to them say what they have to say. A fascinating study. Look it up if you're curious, because there are some other characteristics that will surprise you. But what that's implying is that the people who are participating trust one another. That you're going to listen to me when I speak, and that you will give me time also to speak what I need to speak. And that's what I think is happening, and why organizations are recognizing that collaboration is so important, because trust is a part of collaboration. You have to be able to build it and sustain it, and collaborative skills do that precisely.
So, Denise, I think my answer to this question really has to do both with opportunity and service to customers. And when you walk in the shoes of your leaders today, we have an incredibly dynamic market with a lot of demand that we haven't seen for a while. And the pressure to deliver and reduce cycle time for service is very intense. So leadership is looking out across the enterprise saying, how do we fortify collaboration to meet the expectations of our customers and our stakeholders quickly? Because not only do we have opportunity in the market, but we also have competition.
Good points, all good points. So let's move on to the second question, and we'll go ahead, Madelyn, if you'd like to take this one first. I mean, how have you seen corporate collaboration investments lead to overload? And what were the indicators of that overload?
Thank you, Denise. I kept thinking about how great it feels when you start a new project. Why is that? It's because your desk is clear, your mind is clear, your files are clear. It feels fresh. Well,
Maybe that's a new job, Madelyn. At PwC, that's definitely a new job, not a new project.
Okay. I think that aspect sometimes gets overlooked when you get into collaboration, because one of the things about collaboration is that you really want to hear what other people have to say. You want to know what they're doing. You want to be able to share what you're doing. If they find an article that's of value to you, that you want them to send it to you because you can't read everything. And that, of course, is precisely the area where you can run into what we call overload, where the amount of information that is suddenly available to you, and I'll call it information, but I'll also call it insights, becomes overwhelming. Thank you. I was thinking of a particular example where there was a group, they were working together, and they understood collaboration, they believed in it. And in this process, they decided that they would really share. And they ended up with, files that were all together in the same base so that you could go in and out. And it got to be so huge, literally. And this is not a large group, that people began to withdraw. And I thought, wow, you have to be very thoughtful about how you want to really manage and sustain that collaboration, or people can, in their enthusiasm, overwhelm each other with information. And in this particular case, it really meant that the group had to stop and discuss all those kinds of aspects and then regroup and redesign themselves. And the signal simply was that the conversation, people kept saying, well, I can't quite make it today. And so the meetings would be lacking somebody. It was a natural human behavior to avoid the confusion. So that was the signal.
Thank you. Bill, would you like to comment on this question?
My answer to this one is also on a practical level. Depending on where you sit in your organizations, you look at leadership investment, in solutions that are supposedly targeted to, reducing cycle time of work, processes, and the like. But especially we're seeing a lot of what I would call functional solutions. They're becoming very sophisticated. Salesforce, Workday, a lot of these platforms actually, are automatically pushing communications to, the pool of subscribers. So, you see the volume of both human-generated and machine-generated communications going up. So I think where we've seen complexity and really over-engineered confusion is where these solutions are implemented without regard for the other things that are, up and running. And, what are we adding to the requested bandwidth of the workforce, and how do we implement reasonable and logical selection for people so that they're not overwhelmed?
Exactly, and I think also that in a previous session said the idea that system after system after system was getting rolled out. And in my experience, the system after system is getting rolled out, and they are teaching us how to click here and click there, but they're not teaching us the collaborative behaviors that we're needing to make those systems effective. And that's one of the main drivers behind this is I've sat through session after session of training that I came out and I understood about drop-down menus and things like that, but I didn't understand necessarily what the behavioral change that they were looking for beyond that I now knew how to use a new tool. And they didn't necessarily tell us the collaborative behaviors they were looking to have us drive towards. It was really more just like a tool training. So John, maybe you'd like to go ahead and share your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Let me start with a metaphor. Let's say that we were to ask a person that's in the training profession as a trainer some indicators that they're being successful or that they have some opportunities. And we would hope to hear some things from them as far as the learnings that they're providing in their classroom has provided X amount of profit or productivity back in the organization. Some indicator how there's been an effect of that training. And unfortunately, you probably found, as I have, a lot of times when you ask trainers about some indicators, they will give you a measurement technically called butts in seats. This is how many people we have trained, and it's increased, therefore that's a good indicator. And so they start to move towards an indicator that something happened, but not really that anything has been affected that was the original idea behind this idea. So as a metaphor, what I want to do then to say, okay, well, as an indicator of what we're talking about, traditionally leadership styles has been defined as people who maybe perhaps lean towards being task-oriented versus people who lean towards being relationship-oriented. And one of the indicators that we find initially with trying to push collaboration platforms and ideas and events into an organization is that task-oriented people will start to provide indicators back that sound like now they're becoming more of a relationship type of person, with indications of here's how many more events I went to this year, here's how many documents I put in a shared library for people to use, and that type of indicator, which still has nothing to do with actually the performance in the organization, but more or less a false indicator. And the other thing that happens is we try to push people into just the collaboration space without really understanding what they should be trying to ultimately accomplish, is that sometimes they might view this task as actually competitive rather than collaborative. So in other words, if we're not talking to the HR department and our incentives are not structured and our job descriptions are not structured around this idea, then it's just this extra thing that my managers asked me to do, to go off or add some documents and be collaborative for some period of time, all the while knowing in the back of my mind what my incentives are and what my job description is. And at the end of the year, I'm going to be paid on, and the merit's going to be based on, is going to be what's written down. And so when I'm talking to people about some collaborative ideas, ultimately I'm thinking I'm not going to share absolutely everything because this is a person I'm going to be compared to at the end of the year. So we've seen this in a lot of organizations where ultimately people are thinking of it as competitiveness with some niceties, or the opposite can happen where they look at this word collaboration and they think it means cooperating, and there's a difference between those words. So we might see indicators about how many people they're working with and how many people have clicked on their things, or how many teams that they're on and they're cooperating. But when you dig beneath the surface, the level of work that's happening that actually is the work of a team, which is collaboration, is not there. So these are some of the indicators that we look for to start to determine what's actually happening and if it's the needle that we really intend to move.
Thank you, John. So, we're talking about several examples there of where we potentially are running into a situation of overload or a wall. So, can you perhaps share some examples about where organizations or groups have changed course and refined their strategy to optimize collaboration? Perhaps you can share with us, Phil, what you observed.
Well, I think, my example that I voice typically is PwC. When Denise and I were working together, we organized into a series of knowledge domains where each of the domain teams were focused on either a industry sector or a particular functional aspect of our consulting business in tax or assurance. And that group actually, was deployed against, its organizational customers, but at the same time was under a leader that motivated collaboration across those touch points within that organization that was very productive. And it was very efficient in terms of the sharing of best practices from each of those domains within the firm so that we were able to commercialize innovation and ideas very quickly.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking of how when the knowledge management program was first rolled out, metrics were put into our performance plans that required us to contribute to the knowledge system. Probably, I would guess 5 years later, they were like, we kind of had a metric that got us a whole bunch of stuff, but not a lot, right? So as far as a change course, there was a whole refinement around that metric, which was a very kind of basic metric, right? And I remember them changing course on information overload. We had way too much stuff and not enough quality, and there was a shift.
Yeah.
And I think that was something that was very helpful too, as the program matured, to continue to kind of refine the metrics of how we were measuring success.
Yeah. And that organization actually focused on the question, what do we need to be successful and what can we actually get rid of because it's all noise.
Right.
So, there was a refining in terms of the content and the behaviors across the practices that, again, was very productive.
And what we were rewarded for, the behaviors
Right.
we were
Yeah.
rewarded for as well.
Yep.
I believe it's back to you, John. Is that correct? Started with Bill, yes. Back to you, John,
Great.
for this one. Sorry.
Thank you. I like analogies. Let me start with another one. How many of you have either yourself or been involved with as a teacher or parent sent some kids off to the zoo? There's a couple different ways to do this. You can say, okay, today's a field trip and we're going to send you off to the zoo, and when they come back we can ask them what they learned and what they saw, and you can guess the success of that. Typically what you'll find is the way that that's organized now is they're given a sheet of paper with a list of things they're going to see and some questions that are asked, and it's organized so that it's more of a structured discovery for that exercise. So I like that analogy from the standpoint of saying, let's go into our organizations and schedule a knowledge cafe, a knowledge sharing event, and we'll tell people to get together and share their knowledge. And it really is like sending people off to the zoo. And so what we like to do is look at something called social epistemology. This word that means what we know and how we know as a philosophy, but actually as a management tool, not just for individuals but for teams expected to work together that now have a shared language and mental model of the process of transformational change. And with that in mind, have them go and share knowledge and look at the difference. And as one simple example, I'll give you is based on what we call workability beliefs that occur throughout the change or story process. If you just ask people to share knowledge, typically when you measure what they're sharing, they're telling people what they do. They're telling people what works. This is what I do. This is what works. So maybe you want to try it and see if you can use it. If you've been through a session around social epistemology and you understand that that's one workability belief, and then you learn the other ones, then you start to say, okay, you know what? We've heard that it either works or it doesn't work. But there's also a third workability belief where our mind is at most of the time on a project called could work, and it's a different state of mind. So when you walk people through this and say, share your knowledge, then they start to talk also about, you know what, let me tell you something that's not working. Let me tell you something that we're having difficulty with and get ideas. Or let me tell you something that we believe could work and we're working towards it. We believe it ultimately could work, but here's some difficulties. And then you look at that exchange. And it completely changes the depth and the type of knowledge sharing that's actually happening during that session. So those are just some examples of looking at shared knowledge and mental model going into the sessions that we schedule, or it could be the way that they even interact in a COP on a collaborative platform.
Great, thank you, John. Madelyn?
I think I'm going to have an example, John, that will relate very much to what you were talking about. This was a university that decided they wanted to design an entirely new way of teaching. Now, I think that's really cool that any university is admitting that they could find another way to teach. So I joined that team, and they laid out what they thought this new technique was. And the three of us were working on it. Each of us was designing a particular, or working on one set of three courses that were to work together. Obviously, we had to work together because what I was talking about shouldn't overlap with what somebody else was going to do. Well, the interesting thing happened as they were discussing, and by the way, this is in an organization that is extremely collaborative. It really believes in it, to the point where I've never had a conversation in that school that wasn't polite. There's a problem there, you can tell, right? So we got into this, and we realized, or some of us realized, that the process, this new idea, was not clear. And so we asked the question, it's just not quite clear what it is you're trying to do here. Can you explain it again? So they said, yes, we'll share screen, and this is all virtual, by the way. And they began describing it, and they went through it all. And do we understand it now? And there was this huge response of no. Well, I said this was a collaborative group. And those leaders instantly recognized that what they were trying to do to convey to us things just wasn't working. And what happened was that the conversation itself dropped to a deeper level. And suddenly people began to really talk about what it is that was working, what was not working, what could work, what might not work. And in the end, it all became clear. But it had to drop to a deeper level of conversation. I think that goes back to my earlier comment about trust. You have to get to that place so that you can have things like no, and not feel that that's an inappropriate response, that it's a stupid response. You have to have that comfort.
Thank you, Madelyn. So moving into the last question before we open it up for discussion, John, I think we'll go ahead and start with you this time. What do you think the trade-offs are you've seen used that help organizations recognize the value from optimizing collaboration? So what do you see as the levers or the trade-offs that organizations are having to pull?
Thanks, Denise. First off, I just want to acknowledge, I think that's the right question, in that we classify this as a wicked problem. And when you define something as a wicked problem, we should not expect the answer to be 3 points that you can use in an elevator speech. It usually means there is a trade-off. And it means defining those trade-offs, and in each condition, the place in between those two trade-offs that you're willing to go. Now, this is not a new idea for business in general. You probably heard businesses say quality, price, or speed. Pick two. And we kind of use that as a joke, but each businesses that know that they're trying to deliver something, know they're making a trade-off, and sometimes let the customer help them depending on each situation. They present the trade-off options and then let customers help pick where for them at that time is the right trade-off. So this is not a new idea for business. The question is, as you correctly ask it, how do we apply this idea then to collaborative intelligence? And there are many examples. There are many trade-offs. I'm going to just use one because I've seen it in a lot of cases where the trade-offs would be, on the one hand, the organization's need to retain corporate memory versus, on the other hand, a legal department's need to have a retention policy that says we must delete any document as of a certain age. So there we have very clearly two competing ideas that must have a trade-off answer that says where in between are you going to find an answer. So this is the correct way to go about framing it and framing an answer. And in a lot of cases, in this example, you have to help the legal department understand that maybe there's different types of documents that they must understand exist. There are types of documents that actually lay out the fact that you do have a standard operating procedure, and that is a good thing legally, and that they need to maybe classify them with a different retention policy than other documents. So it takes a discussion and an agreement on the right trade-off for that legal department's needs and your operational needs. But this is just one because I've seen it several times and seen it recently. But there are many trade-offs, but I just encourage us to think about what are the trade-offs that you're dealing with.
Thanks, John. Madelyn?
Yeah, trade-offs is a great word. What I see often happening when I'm working with groups to try to enhance their collaboration is the trade-off between power and ideas. Actually, I think it was beautifully summarized in Catmull's book called Creativity, Inc. I'm sure many of you know about this if you haven't read it. He was the CEO of Pixar, and his whole objective was to make sure that his teams really remained creative and innovative, which meant they had to work collaboratively. They had to bring every piece of information to the table in a way that was acceptable to everyone else. And he spent his time, and he considered it his job, mind you, the CEO of Pixar, his job was to go around and sustain that environment where people could say what they needed to say, even to power. So to me, that a lot of the collaboration has to come where you have an understanding that you don't lose power because people are being able to express their ideas. Their ideas or their questions really have to do with wanting to bring a better product out to the marketplace, not trying to diminish the other person's power. So that to me was the big trade-off.
Phil?
Okay. I don't know that I would frame recognizing value of knowledge management as a trade-off. My suggestion to all of you would be identify your stakeholders, identify your investors, who is actually looking for the data and facts, and be sure that you are monitoring the collaboration change that you're driving in some sort of measurable way so that you can show a before and after. Mm-hmm. And, I think we've seen so many organizations who are reporting metrics about their programs. And, we won't promise you that you're always going to win the value prize with your investors because, number one, leadership changes, over time, there's different business priorities. But in terms of, recognizing value from investment and optimization. Pay attention to the metrics and be sure that the measures you're applying are current and appreciated by the people who are supporting you.
Thank you, Phil. I mean, I think one recent trade-off I saw, just to share my last thought on this, is we're doing a large Office 365 implementation at a large hospitality client, and they wanted to do a very fast timeline in how fast they were rolling it out. But their workforce, in order to be able to learn how to share knowledge differently, learn how to use these tools differently, learn how to collaborate globally differently, they needed more time. It wasn't a matter that they could just roll it out really rapidly, and they agreed to a much longer timeline, over a year, to roll it out department by department, rather than doing a really rapid across the organization. And that trade-off has really given the opportunity for it to take hold, and a lot of change in a way of working, of collaborating, that is, really being seen across the organization. So we've laid out a couple of different ideas here. We're definitely looking at, piloting these concepts in a lot of different organizations right now. We're not saying we have all the answers, but all the people on this panel have different perspectives. We'd love to hear if anyone has a question for the panel. Yes? Is there a particular person on the panel you'd like to address the question to? Okay, anybody like to jump in and take the question?
I think.
Yes. Pardon? Repeat the question?
So the question is, when you go into an organization and you're wanting to look at approaches to optimizing collaboration, where can you find quick wins? And I think, at least my suggestion is, look at the organizational behavior and, the collaborative intelligence landscape, and identify where the major pinch points are and direct, your change efforts at those first. So, things can be somewhat general, but look at the specific bottlenecks that really are sticking out, and focus on that first.
And I'll just add to that, we use a diagnostic that identifies where collaborative knowledge is low within departments, and basically across the organization I was just referring to, there were certain departments that were measuring very low, and we were putting extra energy into those and attention on those departments to try and keep things moving. So I think that those departments that were very far behind can actually pull the whole project backwards. As opposed to the early adopters that can push it forward. So I think it's an awareness of who's on the front end of this and who's on the back end of that, and not letting those people fall behind. Do we have another question?
I just wanted to
Or
add,
did you want to add, John? I'm
just want
sorry.
to
Go
add
ahead.
one point to that. Good question, thank you. That has worked for me in the past, and that is, we know that collaboration and the work of teams is powerful. To go, as you say, for a quick win, I start by asking them what's the biggest problem they're trying to solve, and what the difficulty is that they're having with it. And usually it's because they're trying to solve it with the people in the room. And one of my first questions when I show up is, who is not here that should be here? And that's generally the first question and second question that I ask, that move me in a direction to start bringing the right people in, to start actually creating a team that can solve that problem.
I want to tag on to that. I watched this happen at the World Bank, where they had some really critical issues that had to be solved. And the guy who did this, he was masterful. He invited them to lunch so nobody could say no in the executive dining room. And he just had all the necessary voices around the table, and things got solved. So, yeah.
Another question? Yes, straight in the back. No, I don't think I can make it like that, so you can take it away. But I can tell you that there's a competency model. There's about 15 different competencies in the competency model. Some of them are things like trust, knowledge sharing, things like that. There's behaviors that are identified within the competency model. And then there's also a section on collaboration tools. Because believe it or not, even if people go through training of these tools, they don't necessarily pick it up. So things like how to use workflows, which some people may be like, oh, workflow, no big deal. Other companies have, legacy workers and legacy systems that they find something like a workflow to be something that completely freaks them out. So there's a balance between knowing how to use the collaboration tool and knowing why to use the collaboration tool and seeing if you have the behaviors in your training or in your background. Because some people take to collaboration like ducks to water, and there's a whole bunch of people that just really don't feel that comfortable with it. And they have to be shown, kind of like how to actually build it into the way of working. So I think that, we can definitely talk more offline, but it's those kinds of things that are built into that diagnostic. Anyone else? No?
Yeah, I was going to say, make the IT department your friend, because I typically go to IT and Hiedrick, and we use Box, for example, as a repository. They'll provide all the reports I want in terms of traffic, and who is consuming, who is contributing, who's asking questions. So sometimes you can pull data out of various systems within your organizations to at least give you a handprint.
That's a good point. Another question? Yes.
Are there any standard metrics that we use or measure to show our value to promote collaboration in our knowledge?
She's asking if there's any standard metrics that should be used to show value around knowledge management. When you say around knowledge management, you're broadening the question beyond collaboration. So I'm just clarifying that you're taking it broader, right? And one of the things is, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the fact that an ISO standard just came out for knowledge management. Those that are not familiar with that, you might want to check it out. It's hot off the presses. It's quite controversial. A lot of people have been discussing it for a little while that are on the inside scoop on the ISO standard. I think that, in my personal opinion, and I'll let the panel answer, is each program or each project, you design the metrics based on the business problem, not on a standard. So that's just my personal opinion. Go ahead. Someone else want to enter?
So I have a personal opinion on this.
Go ahead.
Really?
And yes, I do. Ultimately, things have to be done by people, systems notwithstanding. And I found that when people are really, truly collaborating, they really like it. They feel very satisfied because collaboration is all about knowing that you're being listened to as well as being able to say what you need to say. So I look very much at attitude surveys. Are people really happy and satisfied with their work and their teams?
It's true.
Yeah, I was going to say, the classical ROI metrics for knowledge management have to do with cycle time reduction. They have to do basically with and this is from a commercial standpoint, they have to do with the, competitive nature of your services or products relative to competition. So if you're able to value price, what you're delivering to the market, that's a very good metric. Another tool I think that we've used is, we use the firm's Net Promoter Score and looked at the knowledge management related questions that our clients were responding to. And, Denise and I were able to report back to our leadership, these are the metrics that are changing based on our own collaborative efforts and evolution in knowledge services. So you can look around your organizations again for active measurements that you can appropriate shamelessly and say, this is tied to knowledge management.
Which I actually would highly recommend. Did you want to, in our last closing minutes here,
Yep.
add anything final
Just
on that
so
question?
my final thoughts. First, there's ISO standards. There's laundry lists of things you can measure. I would think about a taxonomy of that laundry list being basically business-related questions and understand and focus how you're affecting business. And to Madelyn's good point, the people side, there's something that happens if you're actually collaborating that should be happening. All I would add is, as anyone that teaches organizational learning knows, that basically the philosophy is that ultimately learning faster is the core advantage that you can bring to your organization. And it's interestingly a question we don't ask team or team members: how has this collaboration helped you learn faster? And that's a metric that I would use.
Thank you. So we are out of time, right? Sorry, we're out of time, but if you want to come up and ask your question afterwards, that would be fine. I just want to thank everybody for attending. Watch this space. We're going to be putting out some more information about it, writing about it, continuing to work with clients and customers about it, looking to talk to you all about it. So thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you coming.